Now everybody's hunger is so massively suppressed, and there's no coaching on, hey, you might have to eat more than what your body's telling you to, like difference between the mental cues and the physical cues. And no one's getting training like that. So the end result is a massive amount of starving zombies. And I call them zombies because this is what happens when you're not getting enough macro or micronutrients, macro being calories, micro being vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, enzymes, and all these things that are polyphenols that are really important for the body.
If you've been watching, you know that I take my ingredients very seriously, but there are 3 companies that I have found that I absolutely love. Check the description for discount codes. Welcome to today's show. My name is Adrian, and today I'm going to bring you an expert that's going to bring 2 worlds together. 2 worlds that I have recently used. There's multiple tools in our toolbox to healing and reaching our goals. Just a little background on me. I've tried everything to get healthier and fit and recomp my body, from being on the TV show The Biggest Loser to having gastric bypass to running half marathons and restricting, low carb, and most recently carnivore diet. But as far as my obesity and my blood sugar has gone, I needed another tool in the toolbox, and for me that was GLP. So today I brought an expert in to talk to us about lifestyle changes, GLP, the different tools you can have in your toolbox. So today I have Dr. Jones. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Could you give us a little background about who you are?
Yeah, totally. My journey started while I was overweight as a child, and I remember middle school is when it's really, I was chunkier, and then it just kind of got bigger. I got worse as I got older and older, and I had fit parents too, which is the funny thing. There was definitely, my mom was overweight when she was young, so some genetic aspect there, but she handled it when she was young, and my dad's really muscular and fit, so that didn't help. Made me feel a little bit more like, man, like what is going on? But at that young age, I could never really grapple with it. And I really introverted, really introverted. And it wasn't until I hit 16 years old, I hit 300 pounds. And I'm not an athletic, like football, strong 300-pound overweight guy. I couldn't even do a push-up. So this was really poor metabolic health, low amount of muscle mass. 16 years old, I break 300 pounds. I have this like come to Jesus moment. I remember, they call it a light bulb memory, where you just like, I can smell the gym. I remember when I saw the scale, it broke 300. And for whatever reason, the 50 pounds before didn't cause me to react, but something about those 50-pound notches on the scales it hit me hard. And I think I had that, like, I might die moment, like this is it. And for that, I don't know. I did not control that. It just happened there. And I went home, did all the research, started studying, hired a personal trainer. At that time, this was before fasting. So this was over 20 years ago. I did the old school method, counted my calories, counted my macros. That's what he taught me, and small meals throughout the day, lots of protein, cardio in the morning, weight training in the afternoon. The old bootstrap method, which works. The bootstrap method works if you're mentally able and tough enough and have the time and capacity to do all that, but it's not sustainable, And so I learned that after losing 100 pounds for like the next 8 years. This all too well, Biggest Loser, right? I mean, it's very similar thought process, right? Energy in versus energy out. And so after regaining 50 pounds and then freaking out and then getting into this vicious cycle where every single year I would never let myself get all the way back, but it was like a 50-pound kind of vicious cycle, several years, every year. And it was like my motivation was summertime at that age, like shirt off, summer insecurities, get all super serious, and then lose it in winter, and then just over and over and over. And then fasting came out, and I remember intermittent fasting. My gosh, I was like, it was so contradictory to what I had been taught and what was standard knowledge. So I remember thinking about for a year before I started intermittent fasting, like, should I do this? Is this bad? And then I did it. Best results I ever had at my point. And then that was intermittent fasting, just by, compressing to an 8-hour window. So naturally I'm like, well, what's prolonged fasting? So then I start pushing the envelope with myself and self-experimentation. 2 years later, I'm at a healthy weight, and it's sustainable. It was sustainable. Now, it took me a while to get into long fasting. Don't get me wrong. That was a challenge, but time-wise, I was mentally tough enough to do the fasting, and it allowed me the luxury of a sustainable format, because now I understand I was fixing insulin resistance. So then you fast forward, I become a doctor of chiropractic. I specialize in functional side of things. And lots of fasting with patients. And I just noticed from a functional perspective, because I always had more fasting than other functional doctors. Just it was like a big thing for me. Came up with the whole protocol flow, fasting like our ancestors. But the roadblock was always it wasn't easy, to get patients into weekly long round fasting. I mean, this protocol, we would get people into 48-hour weekly fasts, but the roadblock was toughness of getting into it. Well, then GLP-1 medications come around. And I remember the first time I learned about semaglutide, I was like, that's going to make fasting easier, and that's what I did. And that's exactly what it does. And it still blows my mind that people don't understand that fasting is like a tool that you can use, and GLP-1 medications make it easier to fast. And they both improve insulin resistance. They both reduce inflammation. They both completely different things, but amazing powerhouse tools that really parallel. And so then, peptides, experimenting with those, like my favorite is AOD 9604, a powerful fat mobilizing peptide. And really just over time, working with my medical providers, because they do the prescriptions, I do the coaching, we just kind of, the program just kept evolving. And now where we're at today, the flow protocol really is the solution to proper usage of GLP-1 medications. Proper, right, is a relative term, meaning let's focus on reducing side effects, minimizing complications, maximizing results. Well, how do we do that? Well, we have to incorporate microdosing, lower dosing protocols, ignore the whole status quo of every 4 weeks, bumping it up, bumping it up, bumping it up. And we could talk later about why that is, but why doctors do that, why the whole community does that. But we incorporate lifestyle strategies. So the flow protocol was centered around lots of fasting, but now it's what I call the 10 pillars of lasting weight loss. There's so many pieces to that. The way we approach just nutrition, less processed foods, less carbohydrates, lifting heavy weights, lots of fasting, following a good supplement protocol, reducing inflammation, balancing hormones, optimizing sleep, minimizing stress. You can tell I've said this list a lot, right? And of course, mindset. That's the 10th pillar. And mindset is so huge. And so we work with people at their own capacity and get them to that point where it's like, look, eventually you need to do all these things if you want permanent health maintenance, but let's work at your own rate. Let's get you there. Let's use these tools now, because the GLP-1 is the best tool we've ever had. We've never had a medication slash peptide. I call it a med slash peptide. We've never had one that doesn't just get to a downstream symptom, but rather the root cause, which is for metabolic health, insulin resistance. Now, the only thing more root cause than tackling the insulin resistance with a drug would be tackling it with lifestyle. But we know how challenging that could be due to stress and food chatter. And so that's why this tool is so integral from our protocol, is because it really just smashes the door open, and then we get them in there and then we get to work. So in a nutshell, that's my journey, and that's kind of where we're at.
It's funny, you're just speaking the language of our whole community. And why people are coming in and considering this is because sometimes diet just doesn't seem to always be quite enough. It's like maybe there's a little bit more. And I'm wondering, maybe you can explain this. Maybe the pieces seem to come together better because, well, like you said, it was getting to the underlying insulin resistance. It's getting to the underlying inflammation. It's getting to the underlying stuff and just helping it out. So it feels like they work so well together.
They
Why I
do.
really love you is you had talked about the fear of, should I really be intermittent fasting? Is this even safe? Because the first thing I thought when I added this is it really safe to keep eating low carb? I mean, this is lowering my blood sugar. Am I going to have hypoglycemia? Like, how is this going to work? And, can you explain why this is okay to couple these two together? I mean, I personally have struggled with hypoglycemia since my gastric bypass, and carnivore was the only thing to make it go away. But if I ever dabbled in plants at all, the hypoglycemia came back. I have done a few small tests, and this seems to actually be working on my hypoglycemia for real.
Totally. No, and it's a great question. And it's a very logical concern. I mean, that is definitely one of the more common questions I get. And look, full disclosure, there's no studies that I'm aware of that say, hey, we've tested fasting in combination with GLP-1s and we say it's safe. So, like always, guys, consult with your medical practitioners. By the way, just because that research doesn't exist doesn't mean it's not safe. I have to say that. Despite what someone might tell you, right? You don't have to wait for the safety study. That's probably never going to happen, by the way. And that's a whole other conversation. You don't need to wait for that to take matters into your own hands. And so GLP-1s are glucose dependent, meaning in terms of their ability to lower blood sugar. They're very powerful, which is that's so unique about them is while being glucose dependent, meaning they stop once the blood sugar gets down to normal levels. The blood sugar needs to be high above that baseline for it to kick in, and then it brings it down. So it brings it down to just baseline, and at a really high level degree, kind of like insulin. Like insulin is the most powerful glucose lowering agent we have. I mean, your body makes insulin, and diabetics eventually end up becoming type 2 insulin dependent, and so they have to inject insulin, and that is not dose dependent in terms of your body's reaction. So let me rephrase that. So for the editors, we'll cut that out. But so the insulin is going to be dose dependent. So the increase in the dose of your insulin is going to drive the blood sugar down more. So very, very dose dependent, very, very related to your glucose levels, but it'll keep driving that down. So more insulin can eventually lead to an actual issue of hypoglycemia or even worse. You can end up in the hospital. So that's a concern, and that's why fasting for insulin dependent type 2 diabetics is a scary area. But you look at doctors like Dr. Jason Fung, who wrote the book Obesity Code and Diabetes Code. I mean, he really laid the foundation for this. And that's his solution. That's how he's reversing diabetes all the time for people up there in Canada, is by getting them into fasting protocols. So the good news is we're not talking about being on insulin, right? Which is a little bit more concerning, and you need to be aware of what's going on. We're talking about being on a GLP-1, which again is glucose dependent. Your blood sugar has to be elevated for it to take it down, and it's not going to go below sort of baseline. And I think, as always, it's still a great idea to have baseline blood work, to still be working with a physician, especially if you're getting into deeper rounds like what we encourage, which is the longer rounds of fasting. But generally speaking, for most people, it's a phenomenal combination with little to worry about and lots of upside.
Can you tell us a little bit about microdosing versus low dosing?
Yeah, totally. So, and this is an umbrella term, right? If I'm almost certain Dr. Tina Moore kind of really brought this phrase out there, this concept of microdosing, which is using lower doses than the standard dosing. So for tirzepatide, which is also known as Mounjaro Zepbound, it's 2.5 milligrams of starter dose. For semaglutide, which is also known as Ozempic Wegovy, starter dose is 0.25 milligrams. So microdosing would be this concept of doing anything lower than that. Or now my kind of approach towards microdosing my medical practitioners would be maybe you're on 2.5, but you're doing it once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks, once every 4 weeks. So an intermittent approach. So your monthly dosage would be pretty low. So whether you're saying your weekly dosage or your monthly dosage is much lower than what standard medicine would ever prescribe, that to me all encompasses microdosing. But what's unique about it, if we're really trying to tackle weight loss and we're really trying to get a patient started, it's funny because I've heard people say it didn't do anything for me, and I'm like, well, of course, because you're a dumpster fire of inflammation, and like, no offense, I mean that with all the love. Like everybody is when they start and they're 50 pounds overweight. Like a microdose, you're not going to feel it. You're going to get some inflammation reduction, which could be game changing for your autoimmune stuff. But as far as your insulin resistance and getting your food chatter like noticeably different so you can open the door and start your journey of weight loss, no, you're going to need the standard dose. But that's where things, so we start that same way with patients, but then the standard protocols every 4 weeks, they're doubling the dose, doubling and or increasing, right? So for us, we try to keep them on that first dosage as long as we possibly can. And increasing the dose is the last thing that my providers would do after really dialing in as many things as we possibly can, tailoring it to the individual. So you got your more real metabolically busted people who come to us and they're like 4 weeks in and they're still suffering. Okay, fine, let's go up. Like if you are legitimately still suffering, no more than you did before, probably a little better, but not much, then okay, let's go up. It's not that we never increase the dose. It's just when we're simultaneously putting in the work in the other categories to the best of the degree of the person, right? With limitations they may or may not have. So that's kind of microdosing in essence. And one more piece to add to that would be the goal. So the goal for our program is to get the patient to the point where they can microdose to maintain their weight loss. It's so funny because I used to be years ago, like everybody's got to use this short term and wean off because it's like, oh, it's a bad thing, but it's like a necessary evil almost. And now it's evolved as the research continues to pour out, as our understanding continues to pour out, as I've seen so many more people on it, as I personally continue to experiment with it myself. I just learning more and more. And I'm like, if we microdose this, if everybody microdoses, everybody, a larger population than I thought before, and that's what you need to do to maintain. Is it the most optimal to be on a drug? I always say no, but you have to that's a situational call, right? Because if you need that little peptide or medication at a low dose to produce an outcome that's better that you couldn't get without it, well then it is more optimal, right? So you need your blood sugar lowering medication. If your blood sugar is out of control on the short term, you need that. It's very unhealthy to let your blood sugar stay really, really high. So take the medication for the short term. Same thing with blood pressure, same concept. But then 3 months later, 6 months later, if I can get that same outcome with less or no medication, that's more optimal. So it's just kind of understanding that and within the patient's mindset and where they're at and tackling whatever challenges they can tackle at that time, working with them to progress and always inspiring them to raise the bar. Raise the bar. That to me is huge. And that kind of goes back to the mental piece of it too as well.
I always think it's so funny. People constantly ask me, can you give me a dosing schedule? And first of all, I'm not a doctor, so I cannot. But secondly, I've had seen multiple people in my family try this. We all started the same. For me, I literally felt nothing. For other people in my family, they could not eat. They were like, this is way too much. And so every person seems to react differently. And so you really need to work with someone who can help you with that. And then for me personally, I just went up zero point 0.5 here and there. And that's what we're playing around with right now. Not that I'm encouraging people to play around. I'm saying work with your practitioner.
Of
Is it
course.
inappropriate to say that, you were talking, it's not optimal to take a drug for the rest of our life? Would it be inappropriate to say, in my heart, I feel like it's kind of like vitamin D. It's something similar to our body. It's hormone like. And so it's not necessarily like taking a little bit of blood pressure for the rest of your life. It's like taking a supplement that acts with your body. Would we all snuff at saying, oh, I got to take vitamin D for the rest of my life? Is that a little
Yeah,
bit
no,
too
I
far?
no, I think it's a great question. I think the difference is that we can pretty much generalize supplements into a category that has much lower risk than medications. And so that's the difference. I totally love where you're going with that. And I think GLP-1 is the closest medication to that, to kind of treat it like that, where, you wouldn't snuff for taking it because we need it. But, in theory, if you could get vitamin D levels without having to take the supplement, that would be even better. But we can't because most people, for whatever reason, and I don't actually know the reason, but we lack the ability to convert sunlight into vitamin D. And so most of us have to supplement. Now, the good news is we're comparing to the risk. Well, there's not much risk of taking a vitamin D supplement, right? So that's like, just take it. But we look at a GLP-1 and like any medication, there's a certain amount of risk. And so the goal is to produce this outcome relative, like we have some standards of what health should, what your insulin resistance should be at, what your A1C should be at, how far you want to go, because there's also a difference between being pathologic, unhealthy, healthy, and optimal too. So that's mental. Where are you at? What are we striving for? Within that framework, where the optimal approach would be attempting to replace as many medications as possible with lifestyle and maintaining the health that we're wanting to maintain at that time. So absolutely, for anybody that cannot produce that outcome without the medication, and they notice when that goes down, no matter what they do, the shift in their physiology happens to a less favorable, non-optimal scenario within their framework of their health, like inflammation's changing, insulin resistance is coming back, symptoms affecting quality of life. Well, then you need that, right? And to me, as long as you've actually tested that out, then great. Then that's how you know for certain the medication for you as an individual is the most optimal scenario. But sometimes you have to test that out. And if it were me and my loved ones, I think every year or two, test it out again. Maybe next year you've really dialed in your diet more and your stress levels are better, who knows? And see if maybe you can produce that outcome on less. So um it's tough because there's no standard here in this sort of like concept that I'm preaching. I think most functional doctors really resonate with that concept, but it's just non-existent for medical practitioners because, especially with GLP-1s, I mean, it's just they sipping the Kool-Aid is an understatement. Whatever whatever they read, it's like instantaneous belief, and they're just not. And I hate saying they, like all of them, because not all of them, but a lot of them, unfortunately, are so tunnel visioned into what they're doing, and they're not able to take a step back and kind of look at the bigger picture. Now I'm talking about research and what's being researched, why it's being researched, how it's being researched, what's not being researched, why it's not being researched. And if you can't consider those variables when looking at available data, then you're looking at the tunnel vision that big pharmaceutical companies want you to look at. And people's health pay the price for that. Not to go too far out down that path, but that's obviously I have a lot of passion about that.
We do too. We do too. A bunch of us, carnivore ketos, we do too. I'm with you though. I believe that our bodies can find a new normal. And maybe at that new normal, it's not as dysfunctional, but it has to find its way there. And I think it might need to stay there for a while to make it the new normal because our body kind of fights against it and says, nope, I remember. And I wish we lived in that world where we ate the perfectly clean food and we had the perfectly clean air and water and we never got in this spot to begin with, but that's not where we are today. So it seems like a lot of people are benefiting from adding this tool to their toolbox, but so many people are worried about things like muscle loss, pancreatitis, and their gut freezing. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. I mean, uh, the complications are real, but you can minimize the risks by staying on the lowest dose possible. And if that's your only motivation to adopt this philosophy, then good, run with that, because I think this is the philosophy to adopt is trying to see what you can do to stay on the lowest dose possible. But I think it's also important to understand that it's also severely overstated. It's very flashy to, it's always going to be very clickbaity and garnish a ton of views to say, oh, I knew it. It's not the magic shot. Someone's just waiting, chomping at the bites to put that post out there. And they're going to keep doing that every time we find something out about the medication that's maybe a little bit less favorable. I mean, they already do that now. I mean, that's what happens. People over state how horrible this is, and it's toxic and it's poisonous. I'm like, you have no freaking clue what you're actually talking about. But it's part of that is being perpetuated by the way it's being used. I mean, let's be honest here. We have how many moms that are just like, I'm not going to exercise. I'm just going to get on Ozempics and I'm just going to take the shot and I'm going to lose some weight, and that's what everyone's doing. Yeah. By the way, I don't know if you saw that South Park episode about Ozempic, but it was hilarious. And they do a really good job trying to be as accurate as they can with what's actually happening in the world. And I actually thought they did a pretty good job with that episode. But because Ozempic's becoming ubiquitous even for young kids and throughout society, so everybody knows what it is. So it's because it's being used the way it is, massive demand, a ton of clinics, telemed companies, and all these players trying to get a piece of the pie. And it to meet the demand that's there. And so the end result is just massive uneducation about how it could be used, in my opinion, how it should be used. And then also driven because the only researched way to use it is the way that we talked about, every 4 weeks, bumping it up, every 4 weeks, bumping it up. And that produces problems. That produces massive side effects potentially, and that produces, more risks. And why that is, I mentioned that I would touch on that. It goes back to the narrative. Pharmaceutical companies do what they do, and God bless them, because we wouldn't have had the medication if it wasn't for the research they did. But I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think that their narrative when they did the research wasn't, hey, can we keep people on lower doses? Let's research that. No, it's not even an option. It's this is a brain disease, right? We can't fix it. And so how can we safely increase people up and with reasonably lower side effects? It's okay if a few people, get hurt. It's just part of the process, the numbers. And that's how they come up with the titration schedule. And it's as simple as that. So we got to remember that. and ground ourselves like, okay, there's some risk, but the reward, if you use it this way, I think far exceeds that risk. And so just find that balance, and I think that's the way that you can really take advantage of this opportunity in front of us.
Yeah, I've been going low and slow, and I haven't had any side effects. I can still eat 5 eggs with bacon and sausage. I can still eat my meals. I actually don't feel anything at all. I just noticed at the end of the day that I didn't snack all day. Like, it's very silent. And then it's just very weird. You expect every time you're on a medicine to kind of feel something, and I don't feel anything. I just feel like I snack less, and that's happy. And then I also feel that I'm processing my energy better because all the things that I'm doing, eating meat, lifting heavy, it's actually freaking working. Because
Yeah,
before I would have to struggle and I would have to do sardine fasts and I would have to fast super hard and walk 12 miles a day to lose any weight at all. And the second I took a breath from doing those hard things, I would regain it immediately. I want to talk to you about one of your big things, like why people come to you is because they've hit a stall. So I want to talk about why do people hit stalls?
totally. So in the GLP-1 world, it's much more fine tuned to this problem of starving. But in a non GLP-1 world and just weight loss as a whole, and especially before GLP-1s, this was the more likely cause. Because before GLP-1s, like truly starving was actually, I mean, it happened. I used to manage gyms before I became a doctor of chiropractic. So I managed gyms. We had so many trainers. And so it was occasionally somebody was just so mentally motivated that they would starve themselves despite how massively hungry they were. But now it's different with GLP-1s. Now everybody's hunger is so massively suppressed, and there's no coaching on, hey, you might have to eat more than what your body's telling you to. Like difference between the mental cues and the physical cues, and no one's getting training like that. So the end result is a massive amount of starving zombies, and I call them zombies because this is what happens when you're not getting enough macro or micronutrients. Macro being calories, micro being vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, enzymes, and all these things that are polyphenols that are really important for the body. And uh, over a period of time, there's after experiencing micro macro deficiencies, the body goes, all right, enough's enough. Survival mode. I don't like what's happening, and this is an amazing genius design of the body due to ancestral times of having to survive periods of like normal, just like, well, I don't know when I'm going to eat. I don't know when the next meal is going to be. Your body has this ability to slow down the metabolism, to crank it down. And so you could measure this on labs. It wouldn't be less T4 production, it would be less conversion of T4 to T3, which T3 is that active thyroid hormone, much more active than T4. So you have an underconversion and you have an increase in the production of reverse T3, which is that other kind of stress thing that can block the activation of T3. So you don't want to treat this with thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone would not fix this situation. This would be you need to get the person to eat more. You got to do a reset or a reverse diet. So there's a very common scenario that happens to people when they start with us, and so we put them on this reverse diet or reset where we slowly increase their calories after establishing a baseline, how much they're eating, mentally working with them because there's a lot of like, wait, what? You want me to eat more? Kind of dealing with that. And then once I get their agreement, then we slowly increase the calories because it took weeks, months to get into the starvation mode. It's going to take weeks to get out of it. You got to create the reverse signal to your body. And so there is some finesse to it to get a patient to feel comfortable to eat more when they're in that mental state where they think, "Oh my god, if I eat more, I'm going to blow up." So I got to work with that mental piece. And then once they're rocking and rolling, we look for confirmations of their body not gaining weight as they're eating more, decreases in those symptoms that we talked about that we call zombie mode. So they're more energetic, they're less brain foggy, they're pooping better, they're not feeling as cold, they're just feeling better, they're coming back to life. The juice is turning back on. And they were like, some of these people have been there for a year or two. They didn't even know that they were a zombie until we pointed it out, and they come out of zombie mode and they're like, holy crap, Dr. Jones, I'm eating twice the amount of food. And I've actually lost. Sometimes you even lose weight in the reset, by the way, because the metabolism speeds up faster than the actual rate at which they're increasing their intake. That's always cool too. Either way, we crank them back to normal and then we start the flow protocol. And that's how we fix that issue.
I don't want to make any promises to any people, but I just want to tell you my experience, which was I'm pretty sure I was at an extreme calorie deficit prior to this because I was walking 12 miles a day and lifting weights and then eating nothing but meat. And I was barely losing weight, but also struggling not to gain weight. And I came on this and I probably averaged 2,000 calories a day, and yet I've lost 35 pounds. So I feel like I'm actually feeding my metabolism. My metabolism's happy, but that underlying insulin resistance seems to be working. I just love that, you don't necessarily say everybody has to be keto, but you definitely encourage people. Could you give 90 days a try?
Yeah.
Could you give it a try? And so I love that you're encouraging that to your people. And I think with my audience, if you guys were just add this as a tool, it could bring your pieces together of the hard work you're already doing that Dr. Jones is trying to get his patients to do. Can we talk
Yeah.
about coming off of it? Because some people are like, listen, I just can't commit to this for the rest of my life. People who are already optimizing their eating, optimizing their exercising, and they come on this, can they fix their metabolism potentially and come off of it? I know you kind of touched on this before, but it's a really important one to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, from what I've seen, having done this, with over thousands of people, it does boil down to how screwed up their body is, metabolically speaking, and how tough mentally they are. And I hate to say it that way because I mean no offense to anybody, but sometimes there's just some mentally tougher people out there. And then you can kind of like the subcategory to mentally tough is, well, how stressed out is your life right now? Maybe you're mentally tough, but your plate is already full, with all this other stuff that's going on, your kids, and you're going through a divorce, or your new job, like whatever it is. Okay, that you are mentally tough, but that mental toughness is what's keeping you sane right now. All right, well, you're not going to tackle something that's more intense, and that's where I said every year let's relook at the plate and see where it's at, and see if we can allocate some of those resources. So, mental toughness and mental resources that are available, I think, is one piece of it, and then your body. Because when I look at obesity, which I hate that word, but describing somebody who has some genetic piece to their obesity is kind of to their weight struggles is what I like to use. And I think that there's a certain percentage of people who have become obese by definition, BMI 30 or 35. They either have it's all lifestyle with no genetic piece, and those are the people that respond really well to treatment options, and they fix it, and it's like good. Versus people who
Mm-hmm,
have some genetic predisposition to their obesity, and I think it's a sliding scale. I think it could be anywhere from 0% to like 50, because I've seen
mm-hmm,
people that really are. I mean, it's like they really are dialing things in, and their body is just there's this variable that I can tell, which is like, why is it so much more for you than him, or
mm-hmm,
her? And so I've noticed, this is just my own observation, that there has to be like a sliding scale, and all that means is that person who has the 50% genetic base obesity, you're just gonna have to try that much harder. That's all that means, in my opinion. I've never seen or experienced somebody who's 100%. I'm sure that could exist. I think because besides lifestyle, besides genetics, there's also, what else destroys the mitochondria, powerhouse of our cells, toxic exposure, endocrine disrupting chemicals. And so that's where you can go down a functional path and work with somebody. That's what I used to do. I don't do that anymore. And I have a couple of great ones that I refer out to. But going down that path, is there chemical sensitivities? Is there mold exposures? Lyme, parasites, all these things, and you sounds like these all too well, that really screw up the mitochondria that could be producing, or it's cortisol stress, right? And so some of it's challenging. A lot of it could just be the lifestyle stuff, right? The things that you're not doing that you should be doing, and the other way around too as well. So getting those things in, I think, really makes all the difference. And so going back to the aspect of being able to wean off, right? So does the person want to do that? So that's what we're talking about. The goal is, I want to hit my goal and I want to get off. Okay. So one of the things that I always stress to people, because they'll ask me sometimes when they're at their goal, okay, now what do I do? It's like, well, you should have been asking that question before, because it's not, if you didn't really have any thought process before, you likely are not going to be able to start the same process that the other people will, who have been trying to prepare for that point. The way that you can prepare for the point of being able to successfully wean off, decrease the dose without blowing up, is having installed some real strong permanent lifestyle change that all centers around what I call the 10 pillars of lasting weight loss, finding the right combination of those pillars and optimizing those enough to your body and your body's individual needs, which is going to be different for everybody, every single person, and having that in so that when you start to decrease the dose, your body is not so shocked because these other things are also fixing insulin resistance, are also reducing inflammation, and then testing the waters, right? Because everyone's different. Like in your case, an example of somebody who has something obviously external that's not such basic lifestyle lack thereof or need to do more, like finding out if is there something else. But for people that don't have something more extreme like you, it would just be fixing the insulin resistance and metabolic health with lifestyle during the weight loss journey, so that when they get there, it's just a matter of slowly weaning off. And when it comes to weaning off, there's no textbooks, there's no research on how you should do it. So again, kind of common sense between me and my providers has always been slow and steady, you know? So if you're on 15 milligrams of tirzepatide, not that you would be in my program, but some people, are, and kind of like you can go down maybe 5 milligrams at a time, maybe rule of halves, 15, 7, like 3, like some sort of slow, not fast, because if you abruptly stop, that's a big shock to the body. So what you can go 2.5 every week and take, 12.5, 10, 7.5, 5, 2.5. Like again, there's no protocol to follow, but I can say confidently that the slower you go about decreasing your dose, the easier and smoother it's generally going to be. And then you need to pay attention to, like, you need something objective to pay attention to assess, because there's your own subjective. How do I feel? Do I feel stable? Do I feel in control? And then something objective, whether it's measurements of your waist and your arms and your thigh, maybe a picture every 2 weeks. But then you need some objective data to assess stability. Okay, cool. I'm half off my dose. I feel fine. Nothing's changing. Okay, cool. 2 weeks later, I'm on even lower. Okay, cool. Everything's stable. Mentally, I feel good. Objectively, the body's not changing. And you just keep playing that game. And then when you're finally off, same thing. You better watch that like a hawk, because it's better to go into it thinking, oh my God, I'm going to lose this, and being more prepared. And then all of a sudden, 1 month passes, you're off the medication. You're like, whew, damn, things are stable. Now you can kind of start to let off the gas pedal, which in metaphorical, like your attention on it is what I'm referring to. And then you can kind of start to breathe and enter stability and life. And you don't have to fixate so much on this, because you've earned it, right? You've proven to yourself that you found some sort of combination, the pillars of lasting weight loss. I think fasting for 48 hours once a month is like a baseline that everybody should do for the rest of their life, in my opinion. I kind of look at that like microdosing GLP-1, like a 48-hour fast once a month, microdosing GLP-1s. To me, those are the most powerful metabolic enhancing things that people can do. If we're talking insulin resistance and we're not talking somebody who has an autoimmune or something specific, generally, I think those two things are the most powerful things people can do to have like a real strong chance of staying insulin sensitive, because we live in a life that the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink. I mean, it's like you said earlier, like it's not a fair fight anymore, no matter how hardcore you try to be. So we're fighting a losing battle, and we need something aggressive. If we're, for a lack of a better word, in a real functional world, they would consider GLP-1s aggressive. Most of them won't even touch it. But a 48-hour fast, I think a lot of functional doctors would say that's aggressive too. But we need some aggressive tools here to even the playing field. And so that's kind of how I look at the future and weaning off.
I don't know what you think about this, but there's two things that I'm striving for. Number one, if I keep eating this meat, I'm going to be more full to begin with. And so then I can stay on a lower dose, and the lower dose, the easier it could potentially be to get off. And then my second thought would be, I want to keep my appetite. Like, I don't want to take enough where I mean, it's so tempting to just be relieved of your appetite, but I want to still not fight that. I want to still practice. Am I hungry or am I not? And so if I'm taking more and more and more, and I don't practice fighting that anymore, it's going to be so hard to come off of it. Is that something that you guys do in your groups too?
100% what you just talked about is something that I talk about all the time. Being careful to not zonk your appetite so much that you lose the opportunity. I call it an opportunity to challenge yourself and battle your own hunger, because it is that battle that is what installs mental toughness for the future. And look, I'm sorry, there's no future in the world unless you think, again, I'm just going to be on the medication for the rest of my life. But I think deep down intuitively, like even the people that say that, and I have to be careful because I don't want to offend anybody. I think deep down, if they truthfully thought there was a scenario where they didn't have to be on it for the rest of their life, they wouldn't make themselves feel so right about it, and go out of their way to, because I've seen so many videos and social medias, and I've made, replies, and I try to be as educational and fun and inspiring as I can, but you're going to offend people. You are, and I understand where they're at. They got to make themselves right about their decision. That's human nature. You got to be right about your decisions, because if you're not right about your decisions, then you don't feel good about it and you feel, unstable. But I think deep down, if there was an opportunity to get that person to understand and really believe that they could have the same result on a lower dose, logically, you would do that. So it's challenging though. It's that's a whole other thing. But yes, I think part of future stability depends on maintaining a certain amount of mental toughness. And right now, we're talking about mental toughness specifically in your ability to control normal hunger cravings, right? Like, okay, I go to work and Sally, skinny coworker who just can eat all the donuts she wants, just brings in a bunch of donuts. And I have this schedule where I don't eat junk food on Monday through Thursday. That's my thing. Now I'm talking about me personally, right? But some people kind of mirror Dr. Jones's lifestyle where I'm really good Monday through Thursday, and I just maintain that. That's when I'm going keto. That's when I'm going low carb. That's when I'm doing more fasting. And I'm not lifting weights those days. So if somebody throws some cake and donuts, I generally say no, because that's sort of my baseline. And then on the weekends, if I really want it, sure, I'll go for it. The ability, and no matter what, unless I'm zonked out on a massive dose, like Oreo cookies are always going to look really good to me. And I want to be able to have the toughness to be like, damn, that looks good, but I'm good. I got a date night with the babe on Friday night, and I'm gonna get some dessert that night, and it's cool. Like, I look forward to that. But like you said, I agree 100%. If you go 3 months, 6 months with no hunger, and it's got some allure to it, right? It really does have some allure, especially for somebody who's had no control over their appetite, to just feel what it's like to have no hunger. Okay, fine. I get it. Maybe try it out for a week just to get it out of your system and then go back, but do not stay there, because then you will make yourself mentally weaker in the future, and that's no bueno.
Speaking of funny, I'm going to ask you a funny one I'm seeing. I'm getting this question a lot. Do you think there is snake venom in GLP-1 medication?
So no, there's no snake venom. The original studies, and actually, I guess this was to my shock recently. The original GLP-1s were actually made from the toxins of a Gila monster. That's the original GLP-1 medications. I don't know when that stopped, but originally they actually extracted that. That's how they made it. And then at some point they were able to figure out how to not have to, get it from it's Gila monsters, not snakes, but close enough, right? We're talking about reptiles here, amphibians, reptiles. So it's interesting, but yeah, that's kind of a little bit of where that backstory comes from. They no longer do that. But technically it was that discovery. I don't know how they discovered that, who was studying that, but that's where this whole GLP-1 came from. The observation that those incretin hormones are that powerful at suppressing appetite. And, they've come a long way. My gosh, the first GLP-1 medications, nowhere close to what they are now. And, but that's why I approach them the way I do, trying to stay on low doses.
Okay, this next one's going to break some hearts because I call BS on this.
Yeah.
But maybe you could tell me wrong, is people are saying, well, gosh, I found this bioactive GLP and I don't have to inject it. That's as good, right?
Yeah.
Have you heard of
No,
the bioactivators? I think it's like a multi-level marketing thing and they're plant-based or something. And so they're like, look, it's all natural.
I know. The other company that is so vicious at their, it's the Unicities company, and I have their product. Are you familiar with the tea and fiber, Unimate and Balance?
Oh, I heard about that. Yes, from you.
Yep. Great product, by the way. Don't get me wrong. Love the product. Hate the company. Hate the structure. Sorry, I'm gonna piss some people off when they watch this, because I have some good friends that love it. Phenomenal product. I just don't like the business model. That's all. But it's a lot of, not all of them. Of course, there's always bad actors in every space. Some of those reps, unfortunately, will start saying exactly. And there's a lot of other supplement companies, people that push berberine, Nature's Ozempic. Like, where did that come from? Look, There are many supplements and lifestyle strategies that can cause activation of the GLP-1 receptor. But what people don't understand is that the degree of stimulation from Ozempic, semaglutide being the real first powerhouse out of the earlier ones, Trulicity was before. That was still pretty powerful compared to natural GLP-1 levels. But yeah, semaglutide really was like the first powerhouse, and then tirzepatide is even better. We're talking thousands to the degree times stimulation. I mean, just to put it in perspective, the incretin hormones in your body, like when they naturally get released, and that's what these things are based off of, incretin hormones. They're produced in response to food that you eat, because if you inject it, if you were to inject glucose into the bloodstream, and they've done these studies, you don't get the incretin release. But when you eat food, that's when you get it, and it goes to the digestive tract. You get an incretin response. They last seconds in the body, seconds naturally, and now Ozempic lasts 7 days. So you do the math on that one. Nothing naturally is ever going to come close. And it does piss me off, and I call it out. I call the bullshit out when I see it, because it's like, you're misleading people. You can't say that. Like you said, natural GLP-1 alternative, and then they'll harp on the bullshit that we talked about earlier. The side effects are so bad and the dangers and yada, and it just becomes this fear tactic, fear mongering thing where they're feeling, a lot of misinformation. I will say this: if you can achieve lasting weight loss without the GLP-1 on Unimate, then go do that. That's phenomenal. That means you were both physically not as metabolically busted and or mentally tough enough, the combination of both, for you to be able to do it. And that's great. But you got to remember, N equals 1, like that, just because it worked for you. And that's the other thing. They get on the, oh, it worked for me. You can't be slinging this toxic, this poison, doctor. How can you do that? Yada, yada, yada. All I had to do. And I'm like, okay, let's stop right there. Just because it worked for you, you have no reality on the rest of the world and what they're going with. So I have to, I guess I get the hecklers on my lives, now and then. And it's always fun. So no, we're on the same page there. Trust me.
It's a good addition. It's a good thing to try, but it is not the same as these Ozempic, Zepbound, tirzepatide, semaglutide times 1,000, you're saying. I mean, I can name some things I've tried that feel similar. About day 3 of a fast feels kind of similar, where the food noise kind of comes away a little bit. Like day 3, like not day 1. Day 1's like, eat some food, lady. But day 3, it's kind of like, I could take it or leave it. And the lion diet, I felt that way. But the thing is you keep going and it comes back. It's very different than the GLP. It's very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I agree.
Well, this has been an amazing, great time. I really hope you'll come back on our show. Tell us more of your expertise stuff.
Would love to come back too as well. Feel free to ask your viewers any particular topics they want, or you let me know. And yeah, we'll definitely keep this going.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. And for everyone who tuned in today, thank you for coming. If you have any questions or comments, please put them below, and please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye, everybody.